We're studying the gates of trust. And in the gates of trust, we're learning about how to have a meaningful, real relationship with God, a real relationship with God. And the way to do that, we really need God in our relationship because let's face the fact, we can't survive on our own. We're not capable. We like to make it look like we're capable. We like to make it look like we're in control and I've got this. But by definition, we don't. We don't got this at all. We're just mortal human beings. We're subject to the vicissitudes and to the changing phenomena around us. A little virus shakes the whole world. So we absolutely need the master of the universe to assist us through our anxieties, our fears, and our troubles. We divided those concerns where we need God into 7 categories. Just to summarize, they were those that relate to my own health, that anything that relates to my own wealth, anything that relates to the people around me, my wife, my children, my relatives, my friends, my enemies. Then we spoke about the mitzvahs which affect me. Then we spoke about my divine service affecting other people. We spoke about my reward in the world to come. And ultimately we spoke about my bonus reward in the world to come. And those were the 7 categories where we said that we turn to God for guidance and assistance, but we can't do it on our own. So what we're about to learn today is that on the one hand, God is the only entity who's in control over us. No other entity has any power over us. Only God does. But at the same time, well, that's a very comforting thought right there. It was what introduced us to the doctrine of divine providence, of Hashgacha Pratit, that God is always in control of every single detail, all the time. And therefore, I'm never forgotten. You know, there's that story of a fella who used to come to shul every single day of his life. The minute he turned 100 years old, he stopped coming to shul. So the rabbi comes to visit him and he's like, what's going on? And the guy says, look, he says, Rabbi, when I turned 80, I figured this is it. It's all over. I'm going to die. And I prepared myself to die. Nothing happened. My friends died, but I didn't. When I hit 90, I figured, okay, now for sure I'm going to die. So most of my friends were gone. And you know what? I prepared myself mentally. When I hit 100, I saw all my friends had died. I was the only one surviving. I figured he forgot about me. Why should I remind him? So I stopped coming to shul. But the reality is that God is always watching over every single detail of the universe, not because he's a control freak, but because the way Tanya explains it is that nothing can exist independent of Hashem. There is no such concept as anything having an independent existence from God. God is the only entity that exists. She is a tree of life to anyone that holds on to her. That's talking about the Torah. Nothing else is life because God, by definition, is the only entity that always was, always is, and always will be. Hence the 4-letter name of God, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, which is a combination of 3 words of past, present, and future. Haya, Hoveh, and Yihiyeh. It is only God that is timeless. Nothing else is timeless. Anything else that exists has a beginning and an expiration date. If it has an expiration date, then it's not really alive. We see this concept when it comes to the mitzvah of the red heifer. It's a very unusual mitzvah. You probably have never experienced it we've never experienced it in our lifetimes because it's only observed during temple times. It's a law that pertains to the purification from coming in contact with a dead person. You're not allowed to come in contact with if you come in contact with a dead person, you become impure. How do you become pure again to allow you to eat certain ritual foods and to enter into the temple? For that, you have to be sprayed with the ashes of the red heifer. But the ashes of the red heifer need to be mixed with mayim chayim, with living waters. What's living waters? A river that flows 7 years straight without stopping, that's considered a living water. But if it stops once in 7 years, it's not considered living. So there's a concept that something which is interrupted at least a 7-year cycle is a 7-year. The number 7 is a number that you find within creation, the 7 days of the week, the 7 colors of the rainbow, the 7 notes of music. The number 7 seems to be a number that is connected with the natural cycle. But something which stops before the completion of the complete cycle is therefore considered imperfect and not alive. So God is the only entity that is really alive. Nothing can exist outside of God. So that is the premise for the doctrine of divine providence, to know that wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, God is always with me and intends for me to be right here, right now. This is my mission. That being said, however, is what we start off today, where we say, still a person should never put himself in danger. What happens if you put yourself in a dangerous situation? Okay, so if you're with me, and if you have a book, we're in the middle of page 401. Okay, here it is. Middle of page 401. With a clear conviction that it is given over to the decrees of the Creator may be exalted, and that the Creator's choice for him is the best choice, he must at the same time pursue means beneficial to him and choose what appears to him to be the best course of action in the matter, and God will carry out what he has foreordained. For example, although a person's end and the length of his life are determined by the decree of the Creator, may he be exalted, he must still pursue the necessary means of subsistence, food and drink, clothing and shelter, in accordance with his needs, and not leave this to God, saying, if God has ordained that I will live, he will preserve my soul within my body without food all the days of my life, and I need not bother to seek a livelihood and endure the toil and exertion this entails. That's what you should not say. So you can't rely solely on God and say, God is in control, in full control, and therefore I'm going to sit here and wait for him to send me health, wealth, and all my needs taken care of. You cannot do that. Why? Philosophically, Chabad Chassidus explains that the reason you cannot do that is because God insists on us creating a decoy for the origin of the blessing, so that the blessing seems as if it came not from God, but from somewhere else. This will then allow us the ability to have freedom of choice as to whether we want to choose in God's providence over us and pledge allegiance to God, or whether we choose to deny God's providence over us and pledge allegiance to the conduit through which the blessing came to us, whether that was the doctor who brought healing, or the business that brought livelihood. We then have a choice. So God needs to remain inconspicuous, because if God was obviously present in our lives, then we would not be able to have that freedom of choice. Freedom of choice is so very important. If we lived in this world without freedom of choice, life would be pointless. We'd literally be like a mass production plant where God mass produces us. We do exactly what he wants us to do, and then that's it. There'd be no concept of reward and punishment, no earning or failing, because God is all around you. Everybody sees God all around you, and it's very difficult to sin. Still, it did happen, by the way, like in temple times. In the times of the temple, there were 10 miracles going on at all times. For example, there was not a fly ever with all that meat that was being sacrificed in the temple, and the pillar of smoke never wavered in the wind, and it was never crowded in Jerusalem, which is a miracle. The Jews never complained. Despite that, the Jews still managed to sin and merit to have their temple destroyed. It all depends on what degree of divine revelation is going on, I mean, even think of it this way, when God split open the Red Sea, that was an extraordinary miracle. Still, there was a Jew carrying an idol. His name was Micha. He was carrying an idol across the Red Sea. There were still non-believers there. So it's going to be more difficult to believe, or to deny God. It's going to be more difficult to be an atheist if God is much more apparent. God prefers to be completely hidden. And that's the meaning of us living in exile right now and wanting Mashiach. Living in exile means that we live in a state of spiritual darkness, where we can't see up from down. We don't know. We don't have our spiritual bearings to see the presence of God, to understand our purpose in this world. We're literally feeling like we're groping in the darkness. But when Mashiach comes, that's when godliness will be revealed. And then life will not be boring, because then we will be able to climb the ladder of divine intimacy. And remember, God is intimate, so you can never finish that, and therefore life can never become boring by definition, because you're climbing an infinite elevation. Think of it like when you're in a marriage, and every day you're deepening your relationship in a more meaningful and more beautiful and more loving manner. Think of it that way. So what's happening is, does that mean it's boring because you only have one person in your marriage, one other person in your marriage? Because only the two of us, and how can we ever, we're not distracted by any other people outside of the marriage? That's not boring. It means that you're able to enhance and deepen and make more meaningful your relationship each and every day for the rest of your life. So that's the reason why Chabad philosophy explains the need for us to balance our trust in God and our belief in the divine providence, in hashgacha pratit, divine providence, whilst at the same time making sure not to rest on our laurels and always going out to seek our livelihood, to seek a means to healing, and so on. Similarly, at the bottom of 401, similarly, a person should not expose himself to danger, relying on the divine decree that he will live a definite term. Say, look, I'm going to live anyways to a definite term, so I can't possibly die early, and ingest the deadly poisons or risk his life by battling lions or other wild animals if he does not have to. So you should never put yourself in danger, or by hurling himself into the sea or into fire, or undertake other ventures in which a person cannot be sure of his safety and endangers himself. You're not allowed to put yourself in danger. It's actually a biblical commandment, v'nishmartem me'od lenafshotechem, and you shall be exceedingly careful with your well-being. You're not allowed to put yourself in danger. You can't do anything which is dangerous, right? Why not? Similarly, Scripture has cautioned us in this regard, saying, Lo tenassu et Hashem Elokechem. Do not test God your God as you did at Massa in the wilderness. For one who acts in this fashion cannot escape one of the following two outcomes. Either he will perish or he will survive. Now, what's going to happen is that the Rabbeinu Bachai is going to walk us through now the two options of what might happen to a person who puts himself in a state of clear and present danger. I want to welcome everybody who just joined us. We have Ron Collins and Elaine and Ashley on YouTube. We have also on Facebook, I see Susan Pelosi is there. And good morning to you, Ed, Hockman and Adrian, Chana and Andy Siegelstein. We have Sarah Kramer, Michael Stone. That's very nice. Jews not complaining is a miracle. This is true, Marty. Absolutely, I agree. And Harvey Barnett is back with us. Wonderful, Harvey. Good to see you guys. Okay, so when you put I got to tell you, it's so interesting when I see who's with me. It just helps me talking into the screen instead of sometimes it could be a low energy when I'm just talking to the screen. But when I see you there and I hear you're interacting, it just fills me up with energy and enthusiasm. Thank you. So here's what happens to the person that's going to put himself in danger. It's going to be analytically discussed right now by Rabbeinu Bachai. If you put yourself in danger, how does the doctrine of divine providence play into a person that puts himself in danger? Here's what's going to happen. If he perishes through his rashness because he did something crazy, he will have committed suicide, for which he will be held responsible as if he had killed another human being. You know, suicide is, according to Torah, murder. It's self-murder. You're not allowed to kill yourself, as opposed to conventional thinking that it's my life, it's my body, I can do whatever I want to my body. This is not true according to Torah. Your body is not owned by you. Your body is leased to you by God, and you have to return your body to God in as good a condition as possible, which means that when you die, you've got to be buried. If you come from the earth, you've got to be returned to the earth, not ashes. Ashes is not considered acceptable. Just like Mercedes-Benz wouldn't appreciate it if you returned the Mercedes back to them at the end of its lease in an urn, saying, oh, here's the ashes of the Mercedes that you leased to me. They wouldn't appreciate that. You've got to return it in its original form, which is the car. How they gave it to you, that's how you give it back, right? By the way, Chabad, Palm Beach Gardens, we have our own cemetery, and we would be talk to you about the options the options of having you included over there, having you with a spot over there. But our body's released to us, and therefore you're not allowed to just have dangerous surgeries. You're not allowed to have tattoos. You're not allowed to have suicide, because suicide is self-murder, right? Notwithstanding the fact that dying in this way was in accordance with God's decree and took place with his permission. So even though a person could not have killed himself, if not that was actually God's will. Remember, we spoke about this before, that no one can ever end someone else's life or his own life if that is not the will of God. However, if a person's life was supposed to end, it would have ended one way or the other. The angel of death was sent on the mission. That person would have died. No questions asked. There's no way the person could have gotten out of that. When your time's up, your time's up. This is actually an interesting concept. Just an interesting concept, which I heard from Rabbi Manis Friedman. We were talking about the people that died in Pittsburgh, in the synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I asked him on the radio, how is it possible that, why would God allow these people to die in a synagogue? Like on Shabbos, during the services. You know, we just commemorated the first yahrzeit of Chabad of Poway, of Lori Kay. It was on the last day of Passover when she was killed by that terrorist who broke into the Chabad of Poway in California. How can a person die? She went to say Yizkor for her mother. Why would God allow her to die while she's praying? What did she do wrong? We always ask. And the way that Rabbi Manis Friedman explained it was beautiful. He called it the time's up doctrine. The time's up doctrine. What does that mean? When your time is up, your time is up, and there's nothing you can do about it. Everyone is born with a ticking timer. Some people it's 120 years, and other people it's 62 years. Other people it's 12 years, and maybe months. Every person has got a time. When that time expires, it is all over. How would you like to die? You know, you could die in compromising situations, or you could die in peaceful situations. Some people might die in a warm bed surrounded by family. Other people might die alone in a hospital, God forbid, during coronavirus when nobody can come and visit them. And the way that he explained it was that God takes his loved ones in the most intimate moments, right? While they're davening in shul. What a beautiful way to go. Right, it's Yom Kippur, right in the middle of Kol Nidre, for a person to pass away. There was a real story about this with the Rebbe. Somebody passed away, and if I remember correctly, they said that what a beautiful way to go during the holiness of Yom Kippur, to go up to heaven, right? So this is what he called the time's up doctrine, that when your time is up, your time is up. And therefore, there's nothing that you can do to end someone else's life or your own life without God's permission, without God's approval. However, the way in which that life ends, that way, is something which that person will be held accountable to. So if it was the angel of death that ended his life, okay, the angel of death did his mission. But if you were the one that made that guy's life end early, or if you took your own life, then you'll be held accountable for the murderous intent which resulted in an actual death. We spoke about this concept before. Okay. Okay, so back to the gates of trust. He has cautioned us not to kill any human being in any way, saying, do not murder. The closer his relationship to the murdered person, the more culpable is the murderer, as it is written, because he pursued his brother with a sword and cut off all pity. Obviously, if you kill a family member, it's worse. Accordingly, as none is closer to a person than he is to himself, he who kills himself undoubtedly deserves severe punishment, for he may be compared to a servant whose master ordered him to guard a certain place for a certain amount of time, warning him not to abandon his post until the arrival of his messenger. When the servant saw that the messenger was late in coming, he abandoned his post before the latter came. As a result, his master grew angry with him and punished him severely. So too, one who leaves God's servant and rebels against him by exposing himself to lethal danger. God gave his body and asked you to keep this body intact. What did you do? You committed suicide, right? You took the life of this body, which means you defied the instruction of God Almighty. Not good. And that actually arouses the anger of God, whose mission you actually abandoned by committing the suicide. So this is the first outcome of what happens when a person, puts himself in grave danger. Either he'll die or he'll survive. And that's the other option, which we're going to talk about in a moment. We might not get to that one today, but we'll try. So that is why you'll find that Samuel, the prophet Samuel, this is the prophet that anointed the first king of Israel, King Saul. And he also anointed the second king of Israel, King David, while King Saul was alive. God tells him to go and anoint the second king of Israel, David, who happens to be the hated son-in-law of King Saul, while King Saul was alive. So you can imagine that Samuel didn't feel very comfortable about this instruction. When God tells him to go and anoint David, he's worried that King Saul is going to kill him. And he doesn't want to put his life in danger. So he responds to God. He says, look, that's how you'll find that Samuel, the prophet, peace be upon him, said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he'll kill me. Is that a chutzpah to speak like that to God? God just told you to do something, do it. Samuel says, but I don't want to put my life in danger. He's obviously protecting his post. He understands that his life is entrusted, his body is entrusted to him, and therefore he's not supposed to put it in danger. It was not considered a lapse in his reliance on God. Rather, God's answer to him indicates that his prudence was commendable. As he said to him, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to God. So God tells him, bring a cow with you so that he won't be conspicuous. So that nobody will suspect him of having anointed the king, a new king of Israel, while the current king of Israel is still alive, which would be an act of treason. Take a heifer with you so people will say that you were just there to offer a sacrifice, and therefore nobody will suspect your true intentions. If the prophet's question had been considered a lack of trust in God, the reply to him would have been, I put to death and I bring to life. I wounded and I heal. A quote from the end of the Torah, from Parshas Hazino. God would have said, what are you arguing with me? I'm in charge of life and death. If I sent you on a mission, nothing bad is going to happen to you. God would have said to him such a thing, but he didn't. He said, no, take a decoy, make it look like you're there for some other reason. Or the like, when Moses pleaded, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. When Moses complained to God and he told him, send someone else, God answered, who gave man a mouth? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? When Moses said, I don't want to be God's messenger, I'm not worthy, God says, what are you talking about? I'm in charge. Right? But God does not say that to Samuel. Why not? Because Samuel apparently was correct. Correct about not wanting to put his own life in danger, because a person is not supposed to put his life in danger. Now, just before I continue, I see Marty's question. What about a soldier going off to war? This surely puts his or her life in danger. It depends what kind of war. If you're fighting a war, what's called a milchemes mitzvah, a mitzvah war, for example, saving Israel from her enemies that are trying to kill her, a war of self-defense, or a war of conquering biblical territories. That's a mitzvah war. You're supposed to do a mitzvah war like any war, because that says, Ki tetzei lamilchama olovecha, when you go out to war on your enemies, lo tira mehem, you shall not fear them, which, by the way, Marty, is one of the biblical sources for the doctrine of blind trust. It says in the Torah, when you go out to war against your enemies, you shall not fear them. If you do fear them, you're sent back home from battle. 4 people are sent home from battle. One of them is the one that is afraid, because fear is the lack of trust. Where there is no trust, there is no blessing from God. It's like that faucet we spoke about, that you can have all the blessings, but if there's no trust, the faucet is closed. Where there is trust, the faucet flows, right? So blind trust draws upon yourself blind blessing. When you trust in God, you will win the war. If you fear, it means you don't trust in God. It means you will lose this war. So don't go to battle. So when you have to go to war, for example, if the king mandates a war, then you have to go. You have to fight for your country. You have to fight for your people. But to go for any frivolous war, there's a good reason not to go. Especially if it's not your people, if it's not your country, and then maybe it's not a good reason. You know, if you're arguing over Helen of Troy or something, you know, and some ridiculous, useless reason, then maybe you shouldn't go. But if you're fighting for self-defense, then you should. Right? And it all depends on a case-by-case situation. Now, if Samuel, with his perfect piety, did not take the liberty of exposing himself even to a slight risk of danger, maybe King Saul will hear that I just anointed King David as the new king of Israel. And maybe he'll kill me, because remember, Samuel was the mentor, the Rebbe of King Saul. Would King Saul kill his Rebbe? Not so sure. I don't know. Maybe just be angry with him. I don't know. So if Samuel, with his perfect piety, did not take the liberty of exposing himself, even to a slight risk of danger, through his doing, though his doing so would have been in response to the command of the Creator, may he be exalted, who had said to him, "Fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Yishai, to Jesse of Beis Lechem," that's the father of David, to anoint his son. Then, if in the case of Samuel he was concerned, he was apprehensive about putting his life in danger, then it certainly would be reprehensible if that were done by someone who was not acting in response to the command of the Creator, may he be exalted. We're never going to put ourselves in danger. If you put yourself in danger, you will be held accountable for the potential outcome. Remember that based upon the concept of divine inconspicuosity, I don't know if that's a real word, I just invented it. And maybe the word is anonymity. Based upon the concept of divine anonymity, that God needs to remain anonymous. The way that God remains anonymous is by making it look like Mother Nature is always in charge. That's how God remains anonymous. By now, we know, we've learned this in the meditation and prayer course, that the word Elohim, the other name of God, has the same numerical value as nature, as Hateva. Whenever we see that word, Elohim or Elokeinu, we're talking about God, the way God is disguised through the veil of Mother Nature. What that means is that when you put yourself in a dangerous situation, you might actually die. When you avoid danger, you'll probably survive. When you work hard, you'll probably succeed. When you don't work hard, you'll probably fail. The harder you work, the more you'll succeed. The less you work, the less you'll succeed. So by working within the framework of nature, God makes it look like he's not even in control. He's not even present, thus allowing us to experience freedom of choice. Therefore, when a person puts himself in a dangerous situation, he is making it more likely for him not to survive. And that's why you shouldn't put yourself in a dangerous situation. Let's take a look at these comments coming in here on Facebook. So Michael Stone says, or mass suicide at Masada. I'm trying to understand, Michael, what you mean by mass suicide at Masada. Yes, they all killed themselves, but that was for a very specific reason. Oh, okay, we were talking about suicide over here. You're not allowed to commit suicide. So how could they commit mass suicide at Masada? Now, the reason they did so is because the Romans were very, very upset with the group of Jewish people that were studying at Masada. These were Jews who were fiercely independent from the Romans. It's very painful because they would actually raid in the middle of the night. They would go out and raid other Jewish villages for food. That wasn't very pretty. It's the less pretty side of Masada. But they did that. And there they were up on top of the mountain by the Dead Sea. And when the Romans eventually built their ramp, which is still there today, and they conquered Masada, the Jews on Masada knew that their death is not going to be pretty. They'll be fed to the lions and tigers and gladiators in the Colosseum. So rather than suffer the unspeakable tortures of Roman torture, they took their own life. And you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to commit suicide if you know that you're going to be unspeakable tortures. The same thing happened to King Saul, the first king of Israel, when he fell in battle and he knew that he was about to be captured alive by the Philistines. He actually fell upon his own sword. This, by the way, is the origin of the expression of falling on your own sword. It comes from King Saul, who asked his weapons bearer to kill him, and he couldn't do it to his own king. So it says he stuck the sword and he fell on it. He fell on his own sword because King Saul knew that he would suffer unspeakable tortures in the hands of the Philistines. Same thing happened to Samson, by the way. He took the house down. Remember that expression? Bring the house down. It comes from Samson, who was captured by the Philistines. They gouged out his eyes, and they were torturing him. And he figured, you know what? I'm going to just take down the house and bring everybody down together with me. I'll kill myself, but everybody else. And that way I won't have to suffer anymore. So you are allowed to commit suicide if it's in exchange, or if it's going to save you from unspeakable tortures. Okay, that's obviously a very special case scenario. Harvey, what about Queen Esther, who put her life in danger by approaching the king? Now, that's a fascinating question, Harvey. Queen Esther is, to me, one of the greatest people who ever lived. You see, not many people know that Queen Esther was actually married to Mordechai. Mordechai was not only her uncle, but also her husband. So what happened was that when Esther was taken to the king's palace, to Achashverosh's palace, she was a married woman. And therefore, would this be considered adultery? No, because as long as Achashverosh initiated any interaction, she was effectively raped. But when Esther approached King Achashverosh, she put herself in danger to notify him, to plead for her people, as Mordecai urged her to do. Now, for the first time, she was actually not just coming to talk to him, she was coming to seduce him. So this was effectively an act of adultery. Not only was she putting herself in danger in this world, Harvey, she was actually putting her entire portion in the world to come in jeopardy as well. And that's why she says to Mordechai, Ka'asher avadati avadati, as I've been lost, so too I will have been lost when I enter the king. She was talking on a literal level about losing her life, but the commentators explain, as I lose my portion in this world because he'll probably kill me, I'll also lose my portion in the world to come because I will have initiated an act of adultery for a married woman. So Esther, notwithstanding the double danger that she put herself into, the double jeopardy, nevertheless, she was willing to sacrifice her entire being, her entire identity in this world and in the next world to save her people. And that's another case of suicide, which she was effectively initiating, and it was a miracle that she survived that the king gave her the scepter or faced the scepter towards her, and therefore granted her permission to speak. The fact that she was willing to give up her life in this world and the next world for her people is what makes her one of the greatest people who ever lived. This is utterly selfless, utterly altruistic. She is the paradigm of a great leader, a quality that you rarely see in other places. You know, you look at today's election cycles. Vote for me because I am the most perfect, I'm the most humble, I am the most capable, I am everything that mankind could wish for, therefore vote for me, right? Our elections are always about promotion, right? Wouldn't it be lovely to have a leader that literally throws themselves under the bus, takes the bullet for the team, so that we all are able to survive? You know, we see today what happens in Congress, that there's a double standard. Their health insurance is untouchable, their benefits is nothing changes, but us, that's where the citizens have to stand in line, right? Imagine it was a true democracy where they would treat us the same way exactly that they treat themselves, right? So Esther treats herself to a lower standard than she treats everybody else. She takes the bullet so that other people can survive. And that's a very, very high standard of suicide, which is allowed in order to save your people. Another very, very powerful exception there. Marty, what about U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan? Certainly not amidst the war. That's a good point there, Marty. It's a very interesting question. It could be argued, Marty, that the war in Iraq or Afghanistan was a war of self-defense. I think that's what the war started for. 9/11, Al-Qaeda, hunting Osama bin Laden. You know, this is the guy that was actively trying to take down the United States. So there was an element of self-defense there. I mean, yeah. And I know with Iraq, there's a whole question, was it weapons of mass destruction? Was it not weapons of mass destruction? We as Jews know that Saddam Hussein was absolutely out to kill the Jews. You know, he tried already in the Gulf War, and he wasn't going to stop. So there certainly is an element of self-defense over there. And by the way, America, they called Israel the little Satan, and America the great Satan. So there certainly is an element of self-defense over there, notwithstanding the politics of who was president and who initiated the wars and whatever else. So yeah, while it might not be a mitzvah war, it's certainly a war of self-defense, and you need to defend yourself. You need to defend your people. What are you going to do? Sit idly by and wait for them to send a nuclear bomb? God forbid. You have to defend yourself. That's very, very important. Then you have to go to war. Queen Esther was a soldier in the war for Israel, says Michael Stone, and I agree. Andy, if each of us has a fixed time on earth, how do you reconcile this fixed time with the fact that we each have a destiny, and our time is up theoretically when we fulfilled the God-given destiny? One more time. If each of us has a fixed time on earth, How do you reconcile this fixed time with the fact that we each have a destiny? And our time is up theoretically when we fulfill the God-given destiny. Okay, so you only have a certain amount of time. The time's up doctrine of Rabbi Manis Friedman is that when your time is up, your time is up. You only have a certain amount of time to live in this earth. You also have a specific mission in this earth. If you don't finish your mission in this earth, your spiritual purpose in this earth, within the amount of time allotted to you, then after death, you're sent to the heavenly court, and they could very well send you back down to earth to reincarnate your soul into another body so that you try again. And that is the Sod HaGilgul, the secret of reincarnation, that you need to come back to this world, not for an endless recycling, but you need to come back to this world in order to finish unfinished business. That's how we reconcile, Andy, between time's up versus finishing your mission. You might not very well finish your mission in this world. You might not. You need to come back. And by the way, the Rebbe tells us that Mashiach is coming in our generation, in our lifetimes, which means that there's not going to be any more time to come back and do a tikkun. Whatever we need to finish in this world, we've got to finish now. You can't say, well, I've got maybe another lifetime. The Arizal says you can't come back more than 7 times. And we all have been here before, probably multiple times. None of us are new souls. We're all old souls. So there's no time to waste. Now is the time to tighten our belts and to get the job done, to think about what is my mission in this world and to get it done. There's no more time to waste anymore. Inconspicuousness is the word that Andy is telling me. Michael loves it. That's great. Michael Stone, concealment, good. Rob Berger, the news this morning showed Hasidic Jews in New York gathering in large numbers at the funeral of their rabbi. Do they not believe that God, double negative, do they not believe that God does not allow Jews to put themselves in danger? Why don't they believe? You got a triple negative there up. Okay, let me try to process. I'm going to say, do they believe that God allows Jews to put themselves in danger? I took away the double negative. Do they believe that God allows Jews to put themselves in danger? Why don't they believe? I thought it was the mayor of New York, de Blasio, who broke up the funeral. He got a lot of flack for that. I would say this to you, Rob. Tragically, I don't think they get it. I just don't think they get it. There was one of my teachers in New York. He passed away a few days ago. Rabbi Yisrael Friedman, great man, passed away. And at the funeral, you see the picture. There's like scores of people, and they're pretty close to each other. I don't know. They didn't get the memo, maybe. I'm not sure what's going on. It's very sad. It's very, very concerning that these people are still gathering together like this. Look, let me put it this way. I think that a lot of these religious Jews that you're hearing about in the media, I don't have a TV, thank God, so I don't have to worry about this. But a lot of the people that you're hearing about in the media, they cannot reconcile the fact that God wants us to daven. And as Jews, we're very social creatures. A lot of davening, a lot of kiddushes, a lot of brisim, bar mitzvahs, weddings, funerals. We're always together all the time in each other's houses. They can't reconcile Jewish communal life and Jewish religious life together with social distancing. It's like something we've never heard of before. We've never experienced. Nobody ever in the history of the Jewish people has ever had to keep arm's length away from each other. We've never had to do this. So they can't reconcile their faith with this new ruling, as if it's irreligious. So I think tragically they don't get it. But if they were loyal to this principle of not putting yourself in danger, and the majority of rabbis are pushing, the vast majority of rabbis are talking about do not put yourself in danger. You're not allowed to put yourself in danger applying this principle. It's a very small minority of people that somehow think that they're immune, and they are absolutely putting themselves in danger. It's tragic. So yes, Rob, I want to agree with you. They just don't, they believe in God. They probably know that you're not allowed to put yourself in danger, which is why you won't find these Hasidic rabbis helicopter skiing typically. But they don't believe, or they don't realize, the word here is das. The word is das, really. You know, Chabad is Chachma Bina Das, idea, understanding, and realization, to personally apply what you already understand. They just don't get it. That's the point. They just don't get it. They're so set in their ways that they don't understand that I could die if I go to that minyan, if I go to that funeral or that wedding. They just don't get it. They're like, oh, it's a funeral, the big rabbi, I got to go. They're not thinking. That's what's happening. I think they know that it's dangerous. I think that they know that they're not allowed to put themselves in danger. I just don't think that they click. They don't realize. That's das, making a personal realization, taking a concept that's understood but not applied to oneself. I think it's like the Jews in the Holocaust. Think about it, guys. Think about it. They said it's never going to happen to me. Yes, they know it's happening in Poland. They know it's happening in Germany. But the Jews of, I don't know, France, why didn't they run away? Why didn't they run away? Because it's not going to happen here. Somehow we as people have the self-defense mechanism to say it's never going to happen to me. I think that's what's going on. And it's not unique to Hasidic Jews, by the way. It's just that we happen to live much more social lives than anybody else. And also because of so many kids and engaging and mingling. And also because maybe the media loves to talk about them. Okay. Andy, my Masada excuse is hard to reconcile. I'm not buying it. The Masada excuse remind me what I said. Oh, about committing suicide in order to save yourself from unspeakable torture? Really? Why are you not buying that? Is cancer unspeakable torture? Okay, now let me say this. This is a whole discussion in contemporary codifiers of Jewish law. What is considered unspeakable torture? The answer is that cancer is not. It's talking about being in the hands of a sadistic human being, like a Mengele. In the hands of God, you're in the hands of God. Cancer is the hands of God. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't run away from God. But if it is an evil human being that's going to try and prolong one's suffering to the maximum extent possible, then that is a situation which you may be allowed to take your own life, like in the case of King Saul, who did nothing wrong. In fact, Samuel told him. There's a whole story about how before he went to that war, he actually went to a witch. Saul would kill all the witches, by the way. There was one remaining witch. He went to her. He brought Samuel back from the dead, a seance. He asked him, will I be successful in war tomorrow? And Samuel told him, you fail. You and your sons will die. But through your death, you will be atoning for your sins. And you'll join me in heaven tomorrow. So he knew that he was going to die. In any event, Andy, I'm not sure exactly why you're not buying it. Like, why not? Are you saying that a person should suffer? It's better to suffer unspeakable torture than to take your own life? I'm not understanding why you're not buying it. Okay, Rob, you taught us earlier that pulling the plug is not permissible. How do you reconcile that with what you just said, that it's okay to commit suicide to avoid torture? Pulling the plug is not suicide. Well, I guess it is suicide. Pulling the plug is often done for all the wrong reasons, Rob. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the hospital is a business. And they realize at a certain point that it's not worth it for us to spend X amount of dollars for this person to live another 5 years. We don't think it's worth it. Let's just advise the family to pull the plug, clear the bed, make room for someone else. We'll move on. Right? The medical insurance expires on a certain date. So there's no reason to keep this body alive. It's going to cost too much money out of pocket. Let's pull the plug. That's the problem with pulling the plug. Also, like I said before, cancer is not unspeakable torture. And therefore, so at least not legally speaking, I'm not condoning anybody suffering, God forbid. We should never know from such a thing. But I am saying that pulling the plug would be dealing with torture from God, so to speak. And that's not something you're allowed to do. But if you were dealing with torture from a human being, like being in the hands of Al-Qaeda, like being in the hands of Gaza, Hamas, like Gilad Shalit, now you're talking about if Gilad Shalit, there's a story of Hadar Golden, who's a soldier that they still haven't recovered his body. He was engaged and he was getting ready to get married. During the war of Gaza, one of the wars recently, he went down into a tunnel and he told his friends, he told his troop, if I don't come back within 60 seconds, I'm dead. He goes into this tunnel, and it's unclear exactly what happened to him. But some say that he pulled a grenade or he killed himself. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I don't know. But could it be that such a soldier would have taken his own life? If you're in a Gaza tunnel and you see militants coming towards you, you probably should take your own life. And if I'm not mistaken, that's what they tell the soldiers to do in the army. I do not know this for sure, but I think I heard it somewhere, that you should take your own life because this, the torture that a soldier would suffer in the hands of Hamas is so unspeakable that you don't ever want to deal with it. Okay, so I hope I've addressed that issue, Rob. Happy Yom HaAtzmaut from Pennsylvania. Fantastic, Adam. Good to see you there. Michael Stoner, maybe they were just wrong and sinned at Masada and should have fought till the death. Lions or not? Lions? What lions? Lions? There were no lions of... Oh, lions of gladiators. Yeah. Sorry, Michael Stoner, I got it. Okay, so maybe they were wrong and sinned at Masada. I don't think they were wrong. I don't understand. I'm not sure why this is such a difficult concept to relate to. Like, this is in the code of Jewish law. I'll give you an example. If someone puts a gun to your head and he says, eat pork or I'll kill you, are you allowed to die? The answer is no. You have to eat the pork because you're only allowed to get killed over 3 sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder, which means if someone says to you, kill that person or I'll kill you, you've got to get killed. So is the person liable for getting killed because he didn't want to kill the other guy? No, that's legally allowed to get killed. Is that suicide? No, it's not suicide. You refuse to kill the other person. You refuse to commit adultery. You refuse to commit idolatry. You'd rather get killed. So Daniel Pearl, for example, wasn't committing suicide when he refused to convert to Islam. He was doing what a Jew has to do. He was getting killed for his faith. In the same way that you're allowed to get killed and you must get killed instead of doing those 3 big sins, so too, when you're facing unspeakable torture, you're allowed to commit suicide. I don't understand why you're having a hard time with this. I'm not really understanding. Sarah, if fixed time is fixed according to our choices, then one could shorten life through choices. Rabbi Yechezkel Yishayek brings the sources for this idea in his book. Okay, fixed time is fixed according to our choices. Okay, it's an interesting concept. It seems to be what the Rabbeinu Bachai is saying over here, is that time is fixed according to our choices. I'm not sure how that works exactly with the time's up doctrine. When your time is up, your time is up. I'm not sure if the duration of our lives depends exclusively upon our choices. I'm not sure if I agree with that, Sarah. I don't know about it. How about if you finished ahead of time? Are you talking about my class or are you talking about the guy who's taking his life? I'm not sure exactly. How about if you finished ahead of time? Oh, I think you're talking about your earlier question about the mission. If you have a mission in this world, I spoke to you earlier about not finishing your mission in time and therefore needing to come back to this world, right? But what happens as a reincarnation? But what happens if you finish your mission ahead of time? It's an interesting question. I don't know. What happens if you finish your mission early? I'm pretty sure that you're given the amount of time that you need to finish your mission. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Now, these are, like it says in the Torah, Haniglot lanu levaneinu, those which are revealed for us and for our children, V'anistorot l'Hashem Elokeinu, and that which is concealed is for Hashem our God. We can never truly know the secrets of God Almighty. So how much time goes to certain people? How do we really know? And what is our real mission in this world? How do we really know? Maybe we have more than one mission. Maybe we have to finish it on a deeper level. Maybe to start off in a very secular family that never sent you to Hebrew school and to end up in a meaningful relationship with God takes more than 5 years. Maybe it takes 55 years. You know what I mean? Who knows how much time it takes? How many messengers you need to experience along the way? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think it's knowable, quite frankly, Andy. So, don't know. Yomer Shalom, Marty, no one has lived through the social distancing, not just ultra-Orthodox. Exactly, I agree with you. And it's tragic to see these people that are not just don't get it. Wow, I'm trying to keep up with the comments flying in here at high speed. Okay, trying to keep up, guys. All right. So, Dina Shal Malchus, the Dina, the law of the land in the diaspora. In the U.S., we have constitutions. Some factions of the government are violating several of our constitutional rights. Okay, so Sarah, without getting political about who is or is not violating the Constitution, you are bringing up a point, and that is the law of the land is the law of the land. So if you're living in the United States and they send you on a war, then you probably have to go to that war. So when Marty asked earlier about a war of a mitzvah being in Iraq or Afghanistan, if you're in the army and the army sends you to God knows where, then you've got to go to God knows where because that's the law of the land. So there is a concept. It's like paying taxes. You may not agree with the taxes, but if that's the law of the land, then that's what you got to pay, and that becomes Torah law. The Torah mandates that you pay the law of the land. Andy, because suicide is suicide, and I don't see any excuse. You don't get to decide when you may murder yourself. Okay, so you're pretty strong in this point of self-murder under no exceptions. But you do agree with me, Andy, that you are allowed to murder yourself when you're faced with the three big sins of idolatry, adultery, and murdering someone else. So you would agree with me that you are allowed to get killed, to forfeit your own life. Maybe not at the hands of your own trigger, but you are allowed to forfeit your own life in order not to kill someone else. So you would agree with me with that, I think. And therefore, you realize that there are some exclusions to the prohibition of self-murder, of suicide, of allowing yourself to get killed. Where exactly you draw that line? Okay, so you may disagree with me, that you feel that suicide is prohibited in all circumstances, and I'm telling you that suicide is allowed in certain cases where you are facing the very likely prospect of unspeakable torture. Okay, we should never get tested. And it's an interesting discussion. It's a very interesting discussion in the Talmud. It's a very passionate Talmudic debate as to when, analyzing the story of King Saul, analyzing stories like Masada, and countless such stories in Jewish history where Jewish people literally gave up their lives in order to save their people, like Queen Esther's, I think it was Rob who brought that up, and other people in Jewish history that literally gave up their lives in order to save their people. It's a very interesting concept. Okay, Michael, so sickness is of nature is very different than evil from man. I get it. That's exactly what I'm saying. Sickness comes from nature, that's from God. Man's evil is something we spoke about yesterday in the Tanya class when we said in yesterday's very passionate Tanya class, no evil descends from heaven. There's no such thing as evil. There's only hidden good that comes from God. God either gives us revealed good or hidden good. Then the question was raised by Andy, was like, 1 second, what about evil people? So I differentiated and I said, look, I'm going to draw a line here between the evil that's perpetrated by people and the evil that's perpetrated by God. If it's by God, it's only hidden good. If it comes from people, that's a different discussion. And that's why the nafkamina, to use Talmudic language, the difference of yesterday's argument would express itself in today's discussion of when you're allowed to commit suicide. You're not allowed to commit suicide when you're faced with suffering that comes from God, because it's not evil. That suffering is hidden good, as we explained yesterday in Tanya chapter 26. But if you are experiencing suffering at the hands of an evil person, you could argue, based on today's Talmudic discussion, that since suicide is allowed when you're faced with suffering at the hands of another human being, that is not hidden good, that is real evil, hence you're allowed to take your own life. And I think that's a Talmudic argument in defense of Andy's point yesterday, when Andy said to me that there is such thing as evil when it's perpetrated by a human being. And I didn't want to talk about it yesterday because I didn't want to derail the class. But today, I think in the context of suicide being allowed in the face of torture, I think you've got a very strong argument to say that there is such a thing as evil, that the Holocaust is pure evil because it was perpetrated by evil people, as opposed to something which comes directly from God, like a hurricane or a sickness or a financial setback, which is hidden good from God. A very interesting topic to talk about within the context of allowable suicide. Okay, so Mrs. Kramer, the whole world is now a place of danger. Why is religious concentration more a place of danger than the big businesses who are allowed to remain open? I think that you have the same question, Mrs. Kramer. Same question. I think I made it clear that it's not only the religious Jews, it's everybody that is subject to this danger. I don't know how it works in the big businesses. Again, I don't have a TV. I'm not really watching the stuff. But this is a much bigger discussion as to how this works. And I think beyond the pale of this Torah class today about whether the quarantine is how it works and exactly what the story is and how it affects the economy and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that you're right. If you shouldn't gather for a minyan, then you shouldn't gather for a big business. And vice versa. You're right. Michael, don't pull the plug on me. I don't want to risk it. I got to tell you guys, famous story in Ashul. When Max passed away 10 years ago, he was in the hospital. I remember we went from the radio station straight to him on a Sunday morning. and the family had just signed the plug, the order to pull the plug. They were wheeling him out, and I stopped them. I said, guys, please, you can't do this to Max. And I spoke to them. They reversed the order. Max came out of it a few days later. He danced at his granddaughter's bas mitzvah, which was his life's dream. He had told me months earlier. I think he flew to New York. He came back, and about 9 months or 11 months later, that's when he passed away. But you know what? Michael, you got it. We won't pull the plug on you. God forbid. You should never need. Rob, Andy's replying to Rob. You can't finish ahead of time or late. You can finish when God determined. That's when you are finished. That's right. Andy, but that is murder by someone else. Their freedom of choice. Okay, so Andy is still disagreeing with me, which is good. You're saying that in the case of murder, adultery, and idolatry, that's not suicide. That's still someone else killing you. Fine. Fair. Good point. Good Talmudic debate. Sarah, Rav Chana was one former disciple of the Chafetz Chaim, said it was better to die a physical death in the Holocaust than to die a spiritual death in America. Whew. America at that time was a spiritual wasteland. Ooh la la. Okay, this is a very, very controversial statement you just made there, Sarah. Rabbi Wasserman said it was better to die a physical death in the Holocaust than to die a spiritual death in America. Ouch. I don't agree, respectfully. Even though I do see your point. There is something to be said about that. A lot to be said. In fact, when the great Franco-Russian War took place in 1812, when Napoleon was promising religious freedoms and the Tsar was promising religious persecutions, obviously the majority of the Jewish people supported the victory of Napoleon. But the Alter Rebbe supported the victory of the Tsar. And he said that the French will liberate our bodies and persecute our souls. The Tsar will persecute our bodies and liberate our souls. Interesting idea here, because it ties in perfectly with the doctrine of hidden good, where the suffering that happens to us is really hidden good, which brings out God's love to us, as we spoke tremendously at length yesterday in the Tanya chapter 26. If you missed that class, you'll find it at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. By the way, for a quick reminder, if you could please like this video and share this video on your Facebook or on your YouTube or something else, or subscribe on YouTube, share on Facebook and like on Facebook and friend on Facebook, then we can continue to spread the good word and help us reach more and more people. We'd really appreciate your support and assistance in that matter. So what a big topic it was today, this topic of suicide. I didn't realize it was going to be so intense. Whew, beautiful. Thank you for your feedback. But just to finish your comment over here, Sarah, is to say that there is something to be said about what you said. But I think it's a little too personal for us to say that the Jews should have stayed in the Holocaust and not left. It's too close to home because it's too recent, too fresh in our minds. So I think it's a bit of an emotional discussion on that, which would really derail our class right now. So let me just keep on going. Marty, what about suicide committed by a person with a mental illness? Okay, now, a person with a mental illness, Marty, you should know like this, that a person who commits suicide, are they allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery? Do you know? Is a person who commits suicide allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery? Yes or no? So the answer is generally not. I'm looking at Kobe, 1 second. I just see Kobe wrote something here on YouTube. Yom Kippur was some soldiers commit suicide and some got into prisoners of war. What do you think about it? Kobe, I did not know that in the Yom Kippur War, some soldiers committed suicide. I know the Yom Kippur War was like a war that we lost. We didn't win that war. We lost 3,000 soldiers. It was Israel's 9/11 because we didn't believe that the enemy was actually going to attack us, and we refused to be the ones viewed by the world as the aggressors, as the initiators. God forbid. Golda Meir refused to pull the trigger. It was tragic. So, Kobe, I didn't know that I knew that we lost a lot of people in the Yom Kippur War, over 3,000 soldiers, but I didn't know that they committed suicide. I want to tell you, there is a beautiful story which I want to share with you in connection with yesterday's Yom HaZikaron, just on this exact topic, Kobe. And that is that in, I think it was 1987, the Rebbe gave a directive that it was an Eit Ratzon, it was a perpetuous time of divine blessing, and everybody should go to pray at the graves of the righteous. So that's what happened around the world. Everybody went to daven at the graves of the righteous to intercede, to ask them to intercede on their behalf before God. In Eilat, apparently there's no righteous graves. Famous tzaddikim that are buried in in Eilat. So the shluchim of Eilat, the Chabad rabbis in Eilat, they decided that they were going to go to the military cemetery in Eilat to pray at the graves of the military fallen. Afterwards, they wrote to the Rebbe that this is what they did. And the Rebbe responded with a response that indicated, it was like a 3-letter, very standard response, but it seemed to indicate that the Rebbe was endorsing what they had done. And I just want to share that story with you to say that the soldiers of Israel are those who gave up their lives so that we could have ours. They gave up their freedoms so that we could have our freedom. These are people that died for their Jewish identity. And they are very, very holy people. Anybody that died because he's a Jew, that died fighting to protect the Jewish people, is considered Kadoshim, holy ones. And therefore I want to say that to speak about the soldiers who committed suicide, who are we? Mi ani, ma ani, who am I and what am I to even dare to criticize their actions? Okay. I cannot imagine what it would be like to be a prisoner of war in the hands of the Arabs. To be a prisoner of war in the hands of the Jews, very, very comfortable existence. You know, the terrorists, when they go to Israeli jails, that's when they learn Hebrew, that's when they get a college degree, that's when they learn all sorts of things. It's not bad at all being in an Israeli jail. But being in an Arab jail, I cannot imagine the brutality of the torture that goes on in that 7th century mindset. So I would think, Kobe, that any of those soldiers that committed suicide, and again, I didn't know about it, would be completely okay. That's my opinion. Elaine, how do you classify the deaths of Rabbi Akiva and the martyrs? I mean, they were killed. What does this have to do with suicide? I don't understand. The fact, because there was a decree that you're not allowed to study Torah, and Rabbi Akiva went out and he studied Torah. So was he taking his life in his own hands? That's probably your question. Was he forfeiting his life by studying Torah? So the answer to that question is that Rabbi Akiva was, he said like this: if we study Torah, then we are like a fish in water who may or may not be captured by the nets of the fishermen. But if we abandon Torah, then we're like a fish outside of water who definitely will suffocate. Whether or not the Romans will catch us, whether or not the fishermen will catch us, we're not sure. But if we're out of water, then we definitely will die because we don't have our oxygen, because a Jew without Torah is like a fish without water. So that's the approach of Rabbi Akiva to justify why he was even going ahead to put himself in jeopardy, which really ties in perfectly, Elaine, now I realize, with what we're learning. Are you allowed to put yourself in danger? How could Rabbi Akiva study Torah knowing that the Romans are going to catch him? He was doing so because he was asked to do the impossible. He was asked to stop studying Torah, and a Jew without Torah is like a fish without water, which will definitely die. If we study Torah, we may die, we may not die, because we may be caught. If we abandon Torah, we definitely will die, because a Jew without Torah doesn't survive spiritually. So, therefore, Elaine, Rabbi Akiva put himself in danger because he had no choice. He was asked to do the impossible. Imagine the Romans would say to him, okay, anybody who breathes is going to be killed. You're not putting yourself in danger by breathing. That's what you have to do to survive. And that's why I don't have any doubt that Rabbi Akiva was not responsible for putting his own life in danger by studying Torah. Great question, though. Kobe, many died in the Suez Canal bunkers. Agreed. I'm sorry, that's probably what you were talking about before. I'm assuming that you mean that they took their own lives in the Suez Canal bunkers. But I thought in the Yom Kippur War, Kobe, that the Egyptians marched all the way up to halfway to Tel Aviv. I imagine what happened was that when they were guarding in the Suez Canal bunkers, and I remember reading about this, and they were caught unprepared, and the Egyptians were marching en masse towards them, they saw that they were hopelessly outnumbered. That's when they took their own lives. Got it. Makes sense. Susan, if you choose to not have medical treatment and you die, is that suicide? No, that is not suicide. I'll tell you why. Because a person who is in a medical condition, I didn't realize that suicide was going to be such a big topic. It's very interesting, fascinating. Your questions really bring me to life here. Thank you. So I'll say this to you. When it comes to somebody in the hospital and talking about the whole conversation about pulling the plug and the DNR, which is the do not resuscitate, pulling the plug would mean denying the person one of three mandatory needs: air, food, water, oxygen, hydration, nutrition. If you deny someone oxygen, hydration, or nutrition, that is murdering them. That's what happens when you pull the plug. You deny them oxygen, hydration, or nutrition, or all three. However, if you decline to have medical treatment, for example, you're 95 years old, very sick, and you decide not to have a heart transplant, that's not murder, that's not suicide, because the surgery itself might kill you, right? So to decline having additional treatment is a discussion you have to have with your rabbi on a case-by-case basis. In all cases, even in a 104-year-old, one of our members died last night at 104 years old. Tragic. Hopefully we'll send out an email today. But to deny anybody food, air, or water, that is considered murder or suicide. But to decline medical treatment, that is not considered taking your life in your own hand. Absolutely not a problem. Okay, back to Facebook comments. So back to Facebook comments about Marty's very interesting question about suicide committed with person with mental illness. So I started saying before, I think I got distracted when I said that you're not allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery who committed suicide. Why? Why? Because someone who dies, someone who is considered an evil person, Russia is not allowed to be buried amongst the rest of the Jewish people. He's got to be buried outside of the Jewish cemetery. Someone who died in an act of murder obviously did not have time to do teshuvah, to do repentance. That takes 1 second to do repentance, by the way. But to do teshuvah means that you have a sincere regret in the past and a sincere commitment to change the future, and you are perfectly kosher. Perfectly. 100%. The Talmud tells us that if a person gives a woman a ring and he says, "You are now betrothed to me on condition that I am a tzaddik," a righteous person, she needs a get from him. She's legally married. Why? Because since it takes only a split second to do teshuvah, therefore it's quite possible that that happened in the now, and therefore she's considered legally married. Now, someone who dies during an act of self-murder obviously had no time to do teshuvah. Therefore, they're considered dying in sin, and therefore that person has to be buried outside of the Jewish cemetery. This is also the origin of the tattoos, that somebody with a tattoo cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery. The reason for that is because a tattoo is a sin that you can't really erase. Today, I guess you can erase it, but still, the fact that you have the tattoo, we're not talking about Holocaust tattoos, by the way, those are signs of holiness. They're not evil, God forbid, in terms of sin. But someone with that tattoo, obviously they could regret the tattoo and do teshuvah. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to suicide, the person, since they physically don't have a chance to do teshuvah, therefore we say that they can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. However, today, we always bury suicide in a Jewish cemetery. And the reason is because we attribute it to mental illness. Why would anybody take their own life unless they were crazy? And if they're crazy, they're not liable to their own actions. When somebody commits suicide by jumping off a building, we say that they probably changed their minds on the way down and regretted it, but it was too late, and therefore we bury them in the Jewish cemetery. But anybody, even if they pull a trigger on their own head, is considered still righteous. Why? Because we attribute it to mental illness. We say it's really not their fault. Finished. So the answer to your question, Marty, is an absolute yes. Rob, so if someone gives me COVID-19, God forbid, which came from an act of man in China, not God, and I'm suffering in the hospital, I'm dying, suicide is okay, but if I get cancer, which comes from God, I can't. That makes no sense. Okay, no. You're getting a little too Talmudic here, Rob. How do you know that COVID-19 is an act of God, is an act of man? A man in China, what, because he ate the bat? I don't know if that's an act of man. And how do you know that somebody is not eating an octopus right now somewhere and then is starting some other illness? The fact that this came about is an act of God. I think a pandemic is an act of God. That's what I think. I don't know if you could say, unless it's like some biological weapon, which is a whole interesting conspiracy theory. I don't know about that, but that would be an interesting discussion, by the way, about whether that was a biological weapon if this is an active man. Very interesting question. But, for example, mustard gas, when Gulf War, Saddam Hussein, they all had gas masks in Israel because they knew that he was putting gas on, poison gas on the Scud missiles. That's an interesting question. But when it comes to pandemics, that's typically an act of God. So cancer, you can't pull the plug. And COVID-19, you can't pull the plug. No, can't. I think both cases you're not allowed. Ed Hochman, in the 1920s, immigration laws were adopted to reduce Jews and Eastern European immigration. Okay, I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Sarah, there are hundreds of board-certified doctors who can document that cancer is a chronic disease is about 75% preventable. Okay. Marty, yes, there was a great anti-Semitism back then. I'm not sure if I missed something over here. It looks like there's a whole discussion going on, which I'm not sure is what it's about. And this is the challenge of doing this a class over YouTube like this. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. How anti-Semitism fit in here, I'm not getting it. Not really just Michael Stone, also obesity is the biggest factor in COVID death. Interesting, obesity, the biggest factor in COVID death. So could argue that those people help the COVID do its job. Okay, Rabbi Akiva was a soldier like Esther, I agree. Richard Jacobson, hello. Sarah, like the mainstream media that regularly distorts the news to make the Jews look like it's all their fault. Even a suicide could quickly do teshuvah as they're dying. Marty, I disagree. If you pulled the plug, if you pulled the gun on yourself, God forbid, how are you gonna have time to do teshuvah? Like between the bullets hitting the guy's brain, I don't understand. Like what? Depending, I guess it depends on what kind of suicide. Fair. You know what? I agree. Fair. If he hung himself, then you're probably right. If the guy hung himself, for sure, yeah, he had a few seconds to do teshuvah. But if it was like a bullet, I can't imagine how he would have had at that time. But I'm sure you can understand and relate to what I just said, which is that you are allowed to. The way we rule today is that we say it's mental illness, and therefore we give them a pass to say that they weren't in charge of their own faculties. So difficult when we can't respond verbally. I agree. I meant jumping off the roof. Yes, jumping off the roof is definitely an opportunity for you to be able to do teshuvah. So you certainly agree with me. Good. Okay, great. Back to YouTube. If you choose not to have medical treatment and you die, is that suicide? Well, it depends what kind of medical treatment you're declining. Like, for example, if you choose not to use a respirator like in COVID-19, or if you're choosing not to have not to have invasive surgery that may or may not prolong life. There's a difference between surgery which is necessary to keep you alive and surgery which might let you live longer. It's a very interesting discussion. It's certainly a case-by-case basis, and definitely a specialty in Jewish law in terms of understanding the variety of treatment, what kind of treatment, understanding the risk factors in each case involved, understanding the need. It's very, very complex. So a DNR is certainly allowed. A DNR means that you say, do not resuscitate. If the guy's gone, he says, don't try to shock me back into life. So that's okay, because the shock would be an intervention to bring the guy back to life. So that's okay. You are allowed. The general principle here is, Susan, you are allowed to let nature take its course. That's the general rule. You're allowed to let nature take its course, but to hasten death, that's murder. To hasten end of life, that is not allowed, like pulling the plug. But to decline medical treatment is probably okay, because you're saying, look, I'm letting nature take its course. So it's okay. I must say that does certainly need to be checked with a rabbi that specializes in medical treatments. Okay, if you're 95 and a DNR is placed and you have a major heart attack, paramedics come, but there is no attempt to resuscitate because of the DNR. Is that suicide? I don't think it's suicide, like I just explained. I don't believe that would be suicide. I think that is just allowing nature to take its course. You're 95, a heart attack. Maybe the person doesn't want to be resuscitated. It would be talking about intervening with nature, and that is not necessary. It's okay if you want it. It's good. But if you don't want it, it's okay, generally speaking. Okay. One more question coming in. It's on Facebook. Suicide is one of those issues that leads to never-ending questions. I wouldn't say it's never-ending questions. This is pretty much discussed in Jewish law. As you can imagine, medical science is advancing in leaps and strides. So you can't just give it a blanket answer and say, okay, this is the rule and that's it. There's discussions about stem cell treatments. There's discussions about in vitro surgery, right? Doing surgery to a child before it's even born. There's discussion of all sorts of advances and leaps and strides in medical treatments. So it's really not one size fits all. I can talk to you about the general principles, but how they are applied on a case-by-case basis is really something which we have to look at on a case-by-case basis and to really consult with the relevant authorities. These are cases where you can turn to the world leaders, really, in Jewish law to be able to understand how they work, because it's really not a cut, copy, and paste situation, and I think that's what you're talking about. DNI is do not intubate is also used. So DNI, do not intubate, I think that's similar to a DNR in terms of Jewish law, where you do not need to intervene, and you are allowed to allow nature to take its course. Again, you cannot hasten the death of a person, but you are allowed to allow nature to take its course. That's the general rules. And I'm grateful that Susan is telling me that my answers satisfy her. That is great, as well as the DNR. Good, okay. So with this, friends, I think that we've reached the limit, the time doctrine. So I will bid farewell. We did only discuss the first option of what happens today to a person that puts himself in danger's way, that they might die. But there is also another option, which might be the consequences of survival, and that's going to be very interesting. We'll carry on with that tomorrow. I do want to tell you that tonight at 8:30, Chana is giving a class on Zoom. I think it's only on Zoom. The link is in the email, for men and women on ethics of the fathers. It's from 8:30 until, I think it's at 8 o'clock. Go check the email. I think it's at 8 o'clock tonight. The class is on Zoom. It's on ethics of the fathers, what we study in between Pesach and Shavuos. So the Rebbe Chana is going to be teaching that class. I also will be teaching a very special class on Friday mornings, starting this Friday morning, called Judaism at Home. You know, while it may be argued that all the synagogues are closed, the counter argument is that synagogues have opened in every single home, Jewish home around the world, where we're all praying at home, we're all sanctifying our homes. And what this course is about how we can make our homes truly sanctified, permeated with holiness, talking about the various mitzvahs that apply to our homes, the things that we can do at our homes to make them more Jewish and a place where God is more comfortable. That's taking place on Friday mornings during the Souls on Fire class, which is at 8:30 on Friday morning. So hopefully we'll see you all there. Let me check if there's any final comments coming in. I see Sarah agrees. That's wonderful. And so Ashley's telling me it is Wednesday night tonight at 8 p.m., 8 to 8:30 with Rebbe Chana. And Elaine is telling me that I think most hospitals have ethics panels to set guidelines, but you may have to make sure, Elaine, that in addition to the ethics panels of the hospitals, you cannot rely on them for Jewish law. You need to talk to your rabbi to understand the implications and the directives of Jewish law, which may very well be different to the directives of the hospital. Remember, the hospital can very well be motivated by financial and business calculations. Jewish law does not do that with people's lives. And therefore, I encourage you very much to have a living will. A living will is something which is your directive, your medical directive for end of life, or which would incorporate DNI or DNR, do not intubate, do not resuscitate, how you would want them to deal with you if you were incapacitated, right? But in addition to a living will, I encourage you to have a halachic will. A halachic will is how you want them to, I'm just going to look it up for you so I can post it, how you want people, the doctors to deal with you in the case of where you have a problem and they need to turn to someone to advise what to do in your case, right? So many people will put the name of their rabbi and a replacement in case that rabbi is not available to be able to ensure that that Jewish law is applied properly. You know, I deal with cases where people tell me that, sorry, Rabbi, the decision was already made. There's nothing we can do about it, and there's nothing we can do about it, they tell me, right? So, because it was already decided. But if you're able to, the children already made up their mind about this is what's going to happen to mom, right? But unfortunately, that is not not the way it's meant to be, according to Jewish law. You're supposed to follow Jewish law. So therefore, you have to have a halachic will. I just posted it onto YouTube and onto Facebook now, a sample of the halachic will, and I highly encourage you to look at this and to fill it out and to put it amongst your records, that you have a halachic will to make sure that you're dealt with according to Jewish law, you're born a Jew, and that you also will die a Jew. Okay? So I'm just going to post it into the comments over here. Please take a look at it. I know people that are incorporating this into their will. They actually give this halachic will, a filled out copy, to their lawyers, so that it's incorporated within their will, that it's in a safe place, that everybody will know how to deal with them if necessary. Okay? And with that, folks, I'm going to bid you farewell. I want to say thank you for a fascinating conversation. Always a pleasure studying with you. And thank you for firing this conversation up. Shalom, and have a wonderful day.